The reality of cloning have been a topic for many years, but I've been wondering what could become of cloning in the future for Star Wars, and could it spark a new threat for the galaxy? The concept of cloning in Star Wars is something that I have found to be quite intriguing, especially in how it's been portrayed in Star Wars The Clone Wars and also in Star Wars Legends, especially when we look at the experimentation that Palpatine was working on in Star Wars Legends. Now we have the equivalent version of this in canon, which is called the Necromancer Project, which we have seen in Star Wars The Bad Batch. We assume under this Necromancer Project that Palpatine is trying to clone himself so that it could give an explanation for why he returned in the Rise of Skywalker. However, in that movie, we also know that Palpatine eventually dies, or at least the clone of Palpatine eventually dies. And although it is a possibility, I really do not think that Disney will be bold enough to bring Palpatine back once more from the dead, because I think now he's better off being dead than them trying to resurrect him once more. So this leaves a room in the timeline of Star Wars after the Rise of Skywalker where cloning can return, but in a different way. So this is where I've been inclined to do a little bit of fan theorizing and kind of building my own timeline here that I think could be really cool for Star Wars, especially for those who are more familiar with the Legends timeline. For there is a particular species in Star Wars Legends that made a huge impact in the Star Wars universe not long after the events of the Return of the Jedi. For those who might have guessed already, I am talking about the Yuuzhan Vong species. So now that I mentioned that, you might be wondering a little bit about how can we introduce the Yuuzhan Vong into Star Wars canon without complicating things or making things too weird. Well, one of the fun ideas I have is to combine Star Wars cloning with the Yuuzhan Vong species. You see, if you don't know already, the Yuuzhan Vong are a very interesting and special kind of species that rely exclusively on biotechnology, meaning that they won't use any blasters or lightsabers or spaceships that's made out of metal components and electricity. Instead, they use biotechnology to create their weapons, tools, and means of transportation. They are also completely resistant to the Force, meaning that Force users in Star Wars Legends were not able to affect the Yuuzhan Vong by using the Force, which placed the Jedi in a highly difficult situation, especially because the Yuuzhan Vong waged a war against the entire known Star Wars galaxy and started conquering different planets and even more planets. So what is it that I'm actually proposing in terms of this? Well, the idea would be to bring the Yuuzhan Vong in the Star Wars canon timeline, while still conforming to the idea of cloning. I think it would have been amazing if we had a character, a scientific sociopath, maybe Royce Hemlock or someone else, not really Royce Hemlock, but someone like Royce Hemlock, for example, who would escape into the far, far reaches of the galaxy, probably into a different galaxy, and start experimenting on cloning. However, this cloning experiment takes a little bit of a different turn, and the character who's responsible for the cloning creates what we know today as the Yuuzhan Vong. And then we can also introduce the fact that the Yuuzhan Vong are not tied with the Force, which could be a fun story element for this entire species. As we've seen many times in cloning in Star Wars, they have attempted to infuse Force abilities into their clones, where this character, who's responsible for the creation of the Yuuzhan Vong, they will do the opposite, and instead of trying to give them the Force, they will literally make them so that they cannot be detected within the Force. So this character who was responsible for creating the Yuuzhan Vong kind of knew of the past mistakes of trying to make cloned people and creatures into Force sensitives, so instead they're doing the opposite, which most certainly will be a very interesting twist for the galaxy, and like it showed in Star Wars Legends, it definitely created a lot of challenges that had to be overcome. But all of this is a fun little concept that I've been thinking about, and by no means does it really set up for any realistic potential within the Star Wars canon timeline, but it doesn't hurt having a little bit of fun trying to create your own headcanon and your own head lore of what could happen in Star Wars. So it's not to be taken very seriously, but I do still think it's a pretty interesting and cool concept. I would love for the Yuuzhan Vong to return in Star Wars canon, but I don't want them to just randomly return into the galaxy now that Star Wars need a new big villain. I think that if they would return, they need to return from a cloning perspective, because it enhances the aspects of cloning in Star Wars, which is clearly quite massive right now, and then also it gives us an opportunity to be introduced to a new species from a new galaxy, so they can create multiple movies or shows or novels or even video games where building blocks are established to create this new era of Star Wars, where the Yuuzhan Vong goes on a mass scale conquest against the Star Wars galaxy. And it will give all of the characters after the Rise of Skywalker timeline a great opportunity to expand and become a lot more than what they are right now. But do let me know in the comment section below what you thought about this little idea of what could happen with the Star Wars timeline in the future when it comes to the mad scientist who creates the Yuuzhan Vong through cloning and challenges the galaxy with a massive new threat. And as always, may the Force be with you.